In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a chord arrangement with nice voicings, suitable for a jazz ballad or other song. We'll use Danny Boy for this lesson, a widely recorded song by such greats as Bill Evans and Keith Jarrett. Now this is an intermediate level voicing method. We'll just need the root, third, and seventh of each chord, and I'll assume you know how to build seventh chords. But just to help us out, I'll create a chart of all the chords that we'll need. We'll start by making a lead sheet of the song, which you can see behind me, with a nice selection of chords, and then I'll create a pretty straightforward arrangement with some nice sounding piano voicings. Finally, we'll go back and improve the arrangement with some enhancements by adding some doublings, passing tones, and a few additional chord tones. Let's get started. So first we're going to make a chart of all the chords that are in the key of F. So we build the F major scale, and then we build up the chords up to the seventh chord. And we get a very predictable set of chords. The 1 chord, major 7, the 2 chord, minor 7, 3 chord, minor 7, 4 chord, major 7, the 5 chord, dominant 7, the 6 chord, minor 7, and the 7 chord, half diminished. And that will account for just about every chord that's in this piece. There are a few variations, and we'll put those down below. So we also will encounter the F7 chord, the F6 chord, the G7 chord, a B flat minor 6 chord, a C minor 7 chord, and a C7 sus4 chord. Now just to review, a sus4 chord is one in which instead of having a third in the chord, it has a perfect fourth. In this case, an F instead of an E. The next thing we want to do is identify the third and the seventh of each chord, because that's what we're going to need to create our arrangement, and that's really easy. The third is just that pitch that's a third above the root, and the seventh is just that pitch that's a seventh above the root. Now if the chord is a sixth chord, we'll consider the sixth instead of the seventh. And if the chord is a sus4 chord, we'll consider the fourth instead of the third. We'll color them all in here. Now, with the chord chart in hand, I can turn to the lead sheet for Danny Boy and indicate above each chord the third and the seventh of the chord. I'll write them in with a red pen. This way, when I write the voicing for each chord, I can refer to these. The voicing is going to consist of putting the root in the bass, keeping the melody in the upper voice, and right below the melody, including the third and the seventh. As you can see, for most of these chords, I'm just writing in the third and the seventh. If the chord is just a triad, then I'm just writing in the third. And as I said before, if the chord is a sixth chord, I'm writing in the third and the sixth. And if the chord is a dominant sus4 chord, I'm writing in the 4 and the 7. Just the notes that I filled in red on my chord sheet. Now, the next step is to actually write in the pitches. I'll be writing in the root tone as the lowest pitch for the left hand for each chord. And then I'll be writing in the third and the seventh that I penned in red ink. I'll be putting them in as notes, mostly in the right hand. Notice that in this example, the A, the third of the chord, is already the melody note. So all I really need to do is add the seventh, E, underneath it. For the next two chords, again, I'll put the root tone as the lowest note, and then I'll add both the third and the seventh below the melody note, since neither is included in the melody. And then I'll continue like this, root tone as the lowest pitch, third and seventh underneath the melody, and pretty much as close to the melody note as possible for the most part. There may be some other considerations that I'll take into account as I get to them. Usually I'll be able to play that melody and the third and seventh all with the right hand. Although if it seems like it's easier for me to play it in the left hand, I might include it there. One other voice leading principle that you might want to take into account at this time is to notice that the seventh of the chord likes to move down, and often it moves down to the third of the next chord. You don't have to be obsessed with this at this point, but you might want to notice that as you go along and try to find opportunities to do this. Also, if you can find common tones from one chord to the next, that works pretty well too. Notice in these two measures where the third of the first chord is a common tone with the seventh of the chord that follows. And also the voice leading we talked about with the seventh moving down to the third of the next chord. In this measure, there's only an F triad, so all we have to do is add the third of the chord, the A. It's going to be a little sparse sounding, so we're going to come back a little bit later and enhance it, as well as a few other chords in our second round of voicing. Otherwise, the rest of the song is pretty straightforward, so we'll just continue from here to the end, adding our thirds and sevenths, and of course, sixths if called for. Notice on this F7 chord, the melody is awfully high, and there's an awfully big gap between the melody and the E flat down a little bit lower. I'm definitely going to have to come back and fill in that space so that the voicing sounds better. But for now, that'll do it. So let's give it a listen. Okay, now it's time for me to go back and enhance these chord voicings just a little bit. There are two things that I'm going to want to do. One is I'm going to want to sort of thicken the voicing a little bit, or the other thing I might want to do is add a little bit of motion. So in terms of the piano voicing, I may want to go back and add a fifth if it seems appropriate and fits with the voice leading, or I may want to double one of the pitches. Again, if the voicing seems a little bit wide, that would be a good approach. I might also want to add some color tones, like a ninth or a sixth or a 13th. So we'll look for that. And the other thing I might want to do is add a little motion. For example, I might want to take the seventh of the chord and let it move a step lower. Also, I might be looking for places for passing tones, especially in the bass. When I have the interval of the third, I can always fill it in with a stepwise passing tone. Let's take a look. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is double a pitch here, so that there's not so much space between the bass and the upper notes. I'll take the A, which is the melody, and double it right here. Also, remember I said sometimes I like to take the seventh of the chord and move it to the sixth. So I'm going to put that like that. That's 7 going to 6. And this is a doubled pitch. Moving along here to the B flat major 7, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make the seventh of the chord move to the sixth. That's the A going to G. And also I see a really good opportunity for a passing tone. Whenever I see a third interval in the bass, you could always fill it in with a passing tone, which is a stepwise note in one direction that continues moving in the same direction stepwise into the next chord tone. So that should sound pretty nice. Here again I see a big distance here. I'm going to go ahead and double a pitch to fill that in a little bit. And I'm going to let the seventh of the chord, the G, move to the sixth of the chord here. For the D minor 7 chord, I see a bit of a space. I'm going to thicken it up by adding a fifth in the voicing. Now this is a little tricky, so hang with me here. This is a G7 chord, and I see a great opportunity for a color tone. I'm going to put the 13th of the chord in, which is the same as the sixth interval above the bass, G to E. You'll see that sounds really nice. And I can see an opportunity here to get some nice passing motion. Watch this. This is the 13th, and I'll move that to the flat 13th. And then I'll continue down stepwise to the D here. See the stepwise line? Because that note is the fifth. You can always add the fifth into the voicing if you'd like to, just to thicken it up a little bit. Here for the C7 sus4, I see a little opportunity to put a ninth in there. A ninth is the same as a second interval above the bass. That's the ninth. And one thing I like to do with ninths sometimes is to make the ninth actually go to a flat ninth, which I'll do that right here. The next chord is very similar to the beginning, so I'm going to do a similar thing. I'm going to take the melody and double it to make the voicing a little bit more filled in here. And I'll also take the 7th and move it to the 6th. I'll do the same thing here. The 7th of the chord, B flat major 7, will move to the 6th of the chord, which actually will line up right there. And since this worked out so well here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add the 9th here, and then the flat 9th here. This all sounds pretty good. The G minor 7, I see an opportunity to put the 5th of the chord there. And the reason why that's a good idea is because now this note can continue on to this chord. It's a little hard for me to fit it, but that's the 9th. And then the flat 9th. You can see a little pattern that I'm a little fond of there, the 9th going to the flat 9th. Okay, so we have D, D flat, and then back up to D natural here, which is in that chord. This all will sound pretty good. I see a little space here, pretty big distance between the C and the B flat, so I'm going to double the melody there, the E. And here's the second part of the song. This is just a very simple triad, isn't it? F, A. I think I better include the C, since all we have is a triad. And that's a long way just to listen to a triad. So I'm going to do something that I really haven't done in any other chord, and that is to use a chord inversion. Maybe that's a good topic for another video, but I'm going to put the F chord in first inversion and make a nice little voicing here. There's the 7th, there's the root, and there's the 5th. I think you'll like the sound of that. This is the B flat major 7. I'm going to fill in that voicing a little bit by putting the 5th of the chord in. A minor 7. Oh, let's go ahead and put the 5th in here. And we'll put the 5th in here. I like this because here the A can stay as a common tone and then move up to the B flat. So I'm always looking for ways to make the voice leading look a little bit better. Oh, I see this is a little different. I see an opportunity for a passing tone from C to D. Of course, it'll have to be a chromatic passing tone. I'll make it C sharp. That actually creates a little fancy chord, but I'm not going to talk too much about it. Let's take a look at the D minor 7. I see a big space here. I'll fill it in with a 5th. Well, look at this. See the interval of the 3rd in the bass? Let's go ahead and make a passing tone. Okay. The B flat major 7. Let me put the 5th of the chord here. Never hurts to add the 5th. This is the G7. Oh, I see a good opportunity for another color tone here. Here's the 13th. I did this a little earlier, 13th to the flat 13th. Notice the E is going to E flat. It's begging to go down to D, which is quite possible in this chord because this is the 9th. I guess I'm getting a little carried away, but I can see an opportunity to put a 13th here. Remember, 13th is just like adding a 6th. I think you'll like the sound of that. Now this really didn't sound very good. You had a huge space between that melody note and the 7th of the chord, so I'm going to have to fill that in a little bit, I think. Let's go ahead and just double the A first, and then let's add a color tone. Let's add, since we're playing with 13ths, which is the same as the 6th. 13ths, by the way, sound good with dominant chords. Notice that every time I've added a 13th, they've been on dominant 7th chords. And here's the 13th again. This all should sound pretty good. Here's the 5th of the chord. Let's put that in. And the 5th of the chord here. Again, that'll smooth out the voice leading a little bit. I don't think I need to play with that. That actually sounds quite nice the way it is. I see a nice little motion here. Do you see the C moving down to the B? Let's just make it a little fancier so that we have a nice little line in the middle here. Notice that's the 7th of the chord moving to the 3rd of this chord. Always a good idea. This is the sus4, which is the F, which really wants to move to E. But the E is up here, and I don't want to double the E here. So I'm going to do something a little unusual, but I think it'll work. The F is on its way to A. Hey, how about a passing tone? This is actually something pianists should think about. Oftentimes when we voice lead, we drop the 7th down, we drop notes down. But you should try to force yourself sometimes to make the voice leading raise up too, because it sounds nice and it's fresh. I'm going to go ahead and put here's the 9th that's in the melody. I'm going to go ahead and put a flat 9th here. A nice line. I think you're going to like this. Let's give it a listen, and you've got a pretty nice arrangement now.